American teams. Switching sides. They were an odd couple in the war on drugs, coming together from opposite sides of the law.
I have 150 kilos of cocaine hiding in Chicago. The only person in this world that he knows where that cocaine was, it was me.
The drug dealer who switched sides. Cold justice. Americans, unwitting victims of a secret mind control program run by the CIA.
Whether he was pushed, fell, or jumped from that window. His blood is on the hands of Sidney Gottlieb, Robert Lashbrook, and the others at the CIA who ran this immoral project.
CNN and Time with Jeff Greenfield and Bernard Shaw. CNN and Time, two of the world's leading news organizations.
Good evening and welcome to Newsstand. Bernard Shaw is off. Tonight, trying to find the lines between good and evil, between criminals and crime fighters, between innocence and horror. We have remarkable stories to tell you about tonight that touch on these themes, and we begin in Kosovo, not with reports from generals in uniform, not with political leaders, but with the simple words of one young girl to a friend. She's using the most modern tools of communication to speak of ancient blood feuds and of primal fear. Here's David Lewis.
Finnegan Hamill is a typical Berkeley, California 16-year-old. Hanging out with classmates.
What is the page breakdown?
Working on his high school newspaper. Corresponding with friends over the internet. But Finnegan has a pen pal who is far from typical.
It's hard to just be a teenager and to go out and have fun with, you know, this girl in Kosovo in the back of your mind.
Well, Finny, I have to go now. I hope nothing bad happens here. I wish I could live in peace like you do. You really don't know how happy you are. Take care, Adona.
He calls her Adona. It's not her real name because Finnegan thinks she may be at risk if her identity is revealed. He has been exchanging email with her for several months, writing about his world, reading about hers.
When you're hanging out with the guys and you're joshing around or whatever, it's hard to just bring up the fact, yo, you know, there's this girl in Kosovo and she may be dead tomorrow, you know, and I really care about that. You know, it's hard to believe that as my life is so simple and so easy here that somebody at the exact same time could be going through all of this. And the things that I worry about on a day-to-day basis are nothing compared to what she has to go through. It's nothing compared to, you know, somebody getting killed 20 yards from my house.
Finnegan Hamill made contact with Adona through Marek Zaleskevich, who was traveling in Kosovo several months ago and met a youth group.
And this youth group was like an island in all this sea of killing, ethnic cleansing, ethnic hatred. And they don't have this hatred. They have best friends on the other side of the ethnic divide.
They told him of their dreams of a non-violent future.
At the end of this introduction was a young woman, 16-year-old high school student with blonde hair, very bright.
It was Adona. She asked a favor.
Can you put us through with contacts with our peers in California?
You've got mail.
Just at the beginning of this year, she sent me a message. Hello, I got computer. I'm learning how to use it. This is my first message.
Zaleskevich took her message to young people at his church in Berkeley.
In my first email, I basically just introduced myself and I told her, you know, where I went to school, how old I was. Her first response was basically the same. And after the second or third letter, she really started opening up and talking about some of the the really emotional things that were going on there. People being killed near her house, living in fear.
Finnegan took Adona's emails into a local organization, Youth Radio.
The possibility has always existed that things would turn to full-scale war in Kosovo.
They agreed to put together what became a series of stories.
I've been trying to keep in closer touch with Adona. I came home from school at lunchtime on Monday to check my email.
Dear Finney, today was a very sad day. One of the saddest, scariest, and worst days of my life.
18-year-old Belia Mayeno Choi read the voice of Adona.
At the moment I am writing to you, just from my balcony, I can see people running with suitcases, and I can hear some gunshots. A village just a few hundred meters from my home is all surrounded.
We just put a piece together last night that'll probably air tomorrow of her letters.
The stories were picked up by National Public Radio.
Some mysterious killings are happening.
And a part of the world that seemed remote suddenly became very real to these California teenagers.
When I look in the paper now, if I see the word Kosovo, I'll read the article, whereas before I didn't know what it meant, and it's all these names that we can't pronounce.
It's really opened my eyes to what's happening in the world. You know, I sit down and I read all the Kosovo stories, and I think how they're going to affect Adona. It's all just a little more real to me now.
With reality comes fear for Adona.
I think it's just a feeling of helplessness, because we sit in our little room and we record, and I speak as this girl, but I can't really do anything for this girl. I'm waiting with no patience for the news. So I wanted to show you guys these emails that have come in. It talks about how it's parallel to Anne Frank.
Adona has become more than a pen pal. She has changed the way these young people look at life.
I go through life kind of with a sense of invincibility, and you do hear about rapes and murders that happen around here, but nobody ever thinks it's going to happen to them, and over there, everybody thinks it's going to happen to them.
The email exchanges continued. They put together more stories and recorded their third one this past week.
I have prepared my bag with necessary things: clothes, documents, and money in case of emergency. Yesterday, a part of my town was surrounded and there were shootings happening. I am unable to imagine my future in these moments, and I don't know why I'm thinking so much about it. You can imagine that this could be you, and I think that's what's so scary, is seeing how, knowing that this kind of hatred is within human nature, but it's also good to know that there's this kind of bravery within human nature, especially from a 16-year-old girl.
A girl who has touched the lives of many people she has never met through a medium that exists on a thread.
Once she loses that email contact, I don't know what's happening to her. I don't know where she is. I don't know if she's dead or alive. You know, I have no idea, and I have no way to find out.
Dear Spinny, as long as I have electricity, I will continue writing to you. Right now, I'm trying to keep myself as calm as possible. My younger brother, who is 9, is sleeping now. I wish I will not have to stop his dreams. He's just a child. I really have to go now. There's more news coming in. Thank you for your moral support. Thank you very much. I hope to hear again from you. Take care. Adona, Kosovo.
Finnegan has not heard from Adona since the bombing began in Yugoslavia. The NATO airstrikes and the latest crisis in the Balkans are the focus of tonight's dispatches.
Once the airstrike started, the only vantage point, good vantage point, was on top of the hotel. And there were about 30 journalists on top when police came up and arrested all of them. I inadvertently climbed onto the elevator with 5 police officers and the head of security for the hotel. And one of them said something to the security officer, and just as she was about to answer, the door opened and I walked off. We spent most of the night basically trying to avoid being arrested by the police.
Milosevic was cranking up his own propaganda machine to see if he could find cracks or create cracks in the NATO coalition. Clinton on Thursday delivered a televised address that was beamed into Yugoslavia.
He's forcing your sons to keep fighting a senseless conflict that you did not ask for and that he could have prevented.
Friday, Albright read another speech in Serbo-Croatian.
Moj otac je pobegao u Jugoslaviju.
Each side right now is trying to shape the story in the Balkans to meet its own foreign policy goals.
The order came down that all journalists were being expelled from Yugoslavia and that the order was effective immediately. So we left the hotel at dark, and apparently the NATO planes were already on the way. I think the tensest moment was crossing the border. It took us 4 hours. They basically searched everything, looked through everything, and the vehicles we were supposedly going to cross the border in, they told us we had to go back to Belgrade and pay the tax on it. And I definitely wasn't going back to Belgrade that night. So we parked the vehicles and carried about 3 tons of equipment several hundred yards across the border into a waiting van and made our way through.
Special forces and police came into the hotel and shut down transmission operations.
We had a lot of conversation via cell phone with Brent Sadler while he was still in Pristina, where people slashed the tires on the Land Rover and put a pistol to Brent Sadler's head.
Armed, uncontrolled elements who were hanging around our base at the hotel in Pristina, harassing journalists, particularly ourselves.
Apparently a mob surrounded their car, poured gasoline all over it, and set it on fire with the TV equipment inside.
We will do this as long as it's necessary, and I think that this only shows the brutality of the Serb regime.
Madeleine Albright has been the force behind a more muscular foreign policy toward Serbia. The president has been ambivalent at times. There is no enthusiasm in the Defense Department for these airstrikes. Even in the Pentagon, you can find a number of generals who are muttering to themselves, what in the world are we doing here? What's the final end game of this operation?
We'll be back in a moment.
Bad guys out, start rolling.
Next, a major cocaine deal. In a middle school? In the office of an assistant principal? It wasn't your typical meeting with parents.
He wasn't in any parents' conference.
No, it wasn't a cocaine business with me and the undercover agent.
When CNN in Time continues.
Q&A with Riz Khan, weekdays on CNN International.
For in-depth analysis of the week's events, only one network can bring you the world of basketball. Alex English and Bob Lorenz, this week in the NBA, Sundays on CNN.
There are many sides to every major issue, and no one program brings them all together like Insight. Beyond the breaking headlines and behind the scenes, on the front lines and in focus. With background reports from CNN's most notable correspondents, Insight examines, exposes, investigates, and entertains. For the most intriguing topics and the most fascinating people, turn to Insight with Jonathan Mann. Weeknights only on CNN International.
Where does America and the other so-called superpowers get the nerve to preach disarmament when they spend billions yearly upgrading their military arsenal and bluntly, shamelessly refusing to sign the treaty to ban landmines? I think real peace and stability will continue to elude the world until all people and nations are judged equally.
They say it about politics, but the so-called war on drugs can also make for strange bedfellows. Case in point, a recent assault on the narcotics underworld waged by a pair of smugglers turned crusaders and their DEA point man. Mark Potter now on the odd coupling of criminals and cop and the broad corruption it exposed.
That's the only bad thing about the jail. There's really no outside area here.
Yeah. It is the day that these partners in the war on drugs all
translate everything to you automatically.
Plus, a look at the latest albums being released. World Beat, in tune with Volvo, Saturday on CNN.
This is CNN.
Dozens of NATO jets take off for bombing runs on Serb targets in Yugoslavia. On the ground, ethnic Albanians flee the fighting. And Serb supporters take aim at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, a show of outrage over the airstrikes. Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center. On the fifth night of NATO's strike on Yugoslavia, an air raid alert is still on in the capital, Belgrade. This follows the takeoff of plane after plane from Aviano Air Base in Italy. And joining us now from Aviano is CNN's Ben Wiedemann. Ben?
Yes, Colleen, it's early morning here in Aviano. It's been a very busy night. Many planes, as you said, have been taking off. Behind me, I see more planes coming in. Throughout the night, we saw a variety of airplanes. We saw stealth F-117 fighters. We saw A-6 Prowlers, F-15s, F-16s, a lot of activity. The campaign against Yugoslavia does not appear to be letting up. A steady stream of aircraft takes off from Aviano Air Base as the NATO air campaign against Yugoslavia enters its fifth night. The offensive is now well into its second phase, which is targeting Serb tanks, artillery, and military personnel in Kosovo. F-117 stealth fighters continue to take part in the action, despite the crash of one of these fighters Saturday night outside Belgrade. NATO says the cause of the crash remains unknown, and that the pilot was plucked from behind enemy lines in an operation that remains a highly guarded secret.
You all have, as we've had, the excellent news that the pilot was rescued and is in good physical shape. He's now at Aviano in Italy receiving medical treatment.
NATO officials say their pilots are up against a formidable foe.
This was a very sophisticated air defense system. Some people talk of a David and Goliath fight. Well, I can assure you that it's not that case. We are up against a very hostile, very well-trained and sophisticated environment, which has trained for many years.
The airstrikes have taken on a new urgency as reports trickle out of Kosovo of a ruthless Serb crackdown on ethnic Albanians. Western officials appear to be preparing for a protracted campaign.
This is not going to be quick, it's not going to be easy, it's a very tough environment.
The United States is sending more B-52 bombers to bolster the air armada arrayed against Yugoslavia. With diplomacy on the back burner, it appears there's no end in sight to this campaign. Colleen?
And how is this level of activity that you've seen there compared with the level of activity on other days?
Well, matter of fact, every night is a bit different. Last night, of course, the NATO forces were very busy with the operation to extract the pilot of the F-117 stealth fighter that went down in Yugoslavia. Tonight, we saw a different sort of activity. We saw, for instance, more than 3 stealth fighters taking off within the space of about 5 minutes. So it's very difficult to ascertain, of course, the operational details of what's going on. But certainly there was a lot of activity in the early morning. And now, as I told you earlier, we hear more aircraft returning to base. Colleen?
All right, CNN's Ben Wiedemann at the Aviano Air Force Base in Italy. And watching all of this from the Pentagon in the United States is CNN's Carl Rochelle. Carl, the latest from there.
Colleen, the strikes go on. They're moving to phase 2 of the operations, and phase 2 of the operations means that they are going to be hitting more of the troop concentrations, more of the tanks and artillery pieces, more of the factories that make the munitions of war. The 4 more B-52s been talked about are coming in. The British are providing some more aircraft. The B-52s, of course, are firing the air-launched cruise missiles. At some point, they will move into using the A-10 Warthog for close air support down close to the ground. Of course, that puts them more at risk for the missiles that fly into the area. But look for more of that. Look for a heavy, heavy campaign trying to hit those ground targets. That is what they'll be concentrating on in Phase 2. The F-117, of course, will see more action. It is one of their primary fighters. It drops 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs directly on target, and so they'll be continuing to use that. But look for almost all of the variety of airplanes. Almost everything over there is a dual-purpose fighter. It can drop bombs and it can do air-to-air combat. The F-15, particularly the F-15E, the A-10, the F-16, all of these aircraft, the British Tornado is out there and capable, the Harrier, all of these planes are going to come into play, and you'll see more and more of that as they concentrate on trying to deal with those ground forces that are trying to attack the Kosovars and put that situation under control, Colleen.
And Carl, has there been any more detail from where you stand on the downing of that stealth fighter and whether it was actually shot down or what the cause actually was?
Colleen, they won't tell us what happened, and for very good reasons in their mind. If they in fact know that it was shot down and say, well, it was shot down, that would tell the people, the Yugoslav gunners who fired it, exactly what they did right. And they don't want them to know what they did right if it was shot down. It could be a mechanical problem. It could be a lucky shot. Remember that it is not totally invisible. It is visible to the naked eye. It provides a low profile to the radar because of its peculiar design. The radar waves tend to bounce off of it and off in another direction instead of being reflected back to the receiver, which is the way radar works. Also, it's got radar absorbing material on the outside of it that tends to absorb some of that radiated energy and makes it also a lower stealth. But that's one of the reasons they fly it at night. And if you get a sort of light sky night where there's a lot of moon out, you could spot that black dot going across the sky. And of course, its engines are hushed. They're baffled so they make less sound, but they're still not totally quiet. And if you heard the airplane coming, if you started firing right up in its path, you could put a wall of artillery shells up and perhaps get it. It could be a lucky shot, you know, one of those 1 in 100 shots that brought it down. But they don't want to say that, because once they say that and they convince the Yugoslavs how they did it the first time, then they'll be wanting to try that again. So don't expect them to tell you a great deal more about how that airplane was brought down until after this whole thing is over, and maybe not even then, for those obvious reasons, Colleen.
Understood. CNN's Carl Rochelle at the Pentagon. Thousands of ethnic Albanians are pouring into the neighboring Yugoslav Republic of Montenegro, just west of Serbia. The refugees say Serb forces drove them from their homes, and NATO officials believe Kosovo is approaching a major humanitarian disaster. CNN's Mike Hanna reports from Kosovo's border with Montenegro.
The vanguard of the refugees appearing wraith-like through the mist. Having crossed the border, a crippling climb to the top of the mountain. A fleet of small vehicles moves up and down the road, ferrying those too young, too old, or too frail to walk. At the relative safety of the peak on Montenegrin soil, buses arrive to carry the refugees down the other side to the town of Rojahe. There, an opportunity to recount the horror of recent days, to tell of summary executions, of mass evictions, of Serb soldiers moving from their barracks into the now empty houses, and of thousands of people being taken away in covered trucks to an unknown destination.
The situation is very, very awful over there. Thousands of people were taken, we don't know where, last night. Our house is burning up, our shops, everything. If you don't have money over here, he kill. If you have money here, he kill again.
In one of the cars fleeing Kosovo, the region's Serbian archbishop, and from his staff, accounts of horrific atrocities taking place. The evidence is mounting. At the foot of these mountains, a massive forced removal is underway. It is brutal, but by all accounts, also systematic, coldly clinical. It appears this is not only angry Serb retaliation to the NATO attacks. rather a considered program of ethnic cleansing. Mike Hanna, CNN, on the Kosovo border.
A representative of the Kosovo Liberation Army is calling for NATO ground forces in the province. Hashim Tachi says this is the hour of need for Kosovo. He says Serb forces appear to be conducting a systematic campaign to wipe out the provincial capital, Pristina, and says there have been mass killings in Kosovo.
Only last night in the city of Suhareka, more than 30 people were executed. And in a village called Goden, which is in the border region with Albania, 22 teachers were hanged in front of their students. And today in the village called Bela Crk in Suharek, many people were executed and killed.
But Yugoslavia denies its forces are carrying out a campaign of ethnic cleansing. Officials say they're trying to rid the area of what they call terrorists. And they say Kosovars are actually fleeing because they're afraid of NATO airstrikes. Still, there are those who say a genocide is being carried out. But is it? CNN's Jonathan Aiken has that.
What's happening in Kosovo has been called ethnic cleansing, the wholesale removal of ethnic populations. But is it genocide? Britain's defense secretary thinks so.
That we are confronting a regime which is intent on genocide.
Some legal analysts do as well, citing a 1948 UN convention.
I think it's genocide by probably any definition, but specifically it's genocide by the definition of the Convention Against Genocide, which over 100 countries are parties to, including the United States, Europe, most of Europe, and Yugoslavia.
The UN Convention signed in 1948 says genocide involves the intent to destroy, whether in whole or in part, any national, ethnic, religious, or racial group. But so far, the Clinton administration has used the word sparingly, and only in connection with the International War Crimes Tribunal.
We will continue to work with the prosecutor of the International Tribunal to assist her efforts to prosecute anyone responsible for ordering and carrying out war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide in Kosovo.
The 1948 convention says signatory nations may ask the UN to take such action as they consider appropriate for the prevention and suppression of acts of genocide. NATO hasn't asked for and says it doesn't need UN approval for Operation Allied Force. And the UN has sanctioned military actions in the past in the name of regional security, like Bosnia. The U.S. says the brutal behavior of the Serbs leaves little room for ambiguity.
We've seen a pattern of this in Bosnia, and we've seen a pattern of this in Croatia, and a pattern of this in Slovenia, that it is better to act now than to wait.
If the definition of genocide is sometimes vague, the reality is usually far too clear. The Holocaust, Rwanda, and Bosnia, all crimes against humanity. For the U.S., there may be a strategic reason to be reticent. The man who some say is the architect of genocide in the Balkans may be the person NATO has to negotiate with to end it. Jonathan Aiken for CNN, Washington.
Still ahead, why the NATO operation is igniting anger against the United States. Stay with us.
A rich and magnificent culture. No wonder people say our in-flight service is legendary.
Due to regional time changes, most CNN programming will be seen 1 hour later. CNN will return to its regular schedule on April 4th.
Russia has long been a supporter of Serb causes. On Sunday, 3 Russian politicians flew to Belgrade for meetings with Yugoslavia's deputy prime minister. They're expected to try to find a diplomatic solution to the fighting in Kosovo. CNN's Steve Harrigan is covering Russian reaction to the NATO strikes and joins us now from Moscow. Steve?
Well, Colleen, here in Moscow, 3 men were detained by Russian police for a violent attack on the U.S. Embassy Sunday. There's no word yet from the police whether, in fact, they are the men responsible for the attack. But as CNN's Jill Doherty reports, the angry rhetoric here in Moscow has turned violent.
There were about 1,000 anti-NATO protesters outside the U.S. Embassy, a smaller crowd than usual. Suddenly, a white car drove up.
I just happened to be looking at this white car standing here when a man in camouflage gets out, and I said, look, he's going to start firing.
The man in camouflage clothing raised a rocket-propelled grenade launcher to fire at the embassy. Police say the launcher apparently malfunctioned. Witnesses say the man grabbed another launcher. Police opened fire with pistols. The man jumped into the car and fired back with an automatic weapon. 7 or 8 bullets hit the embassy. U.S. officials said no one was hurt. The car sped away. Police recovered 2 grenade launchers left behind by the shooter. Police, Federal Security Service troops, and police special forces were beefed up.
You can see that we pushed most of the people away from the embassy. People are now located a good distance
to the future. And for the end of the week, Earth Matters, the world's only global environmental program. New insights into business and technology, Monday to Friday at lunchtime. For the broader view, CNN.
This is CNN.
NATO intensifies its air attacks. The main target of Phase 2, Serbian ground forces.
In Pristina and throughout Yugoslavia, the air bombardments caused heavy damage.
And thousands of ethnic Albanians flee their homes.
Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center.
And I'm Bettina Lüscher in Berlin.
NATO forces are turning their attention to Yugoslav military units in Kosovo as they shift into Phase 2 of Operation Allied Force. Dozens of warplanes took off from Italy Sunday as NATO carried out a 5th night of air attacks on Yugoslavia. The air campaign is now focusing strikes on Yugoslav tanks, heavy weapons, and command centers in the Serbian province. Serbian television broadcast night footage of damage throughout the country, including the provincial capital of Pristina. It showed a large building described as the police center in Pristina, partly destroyed and burning out of control. Serbian officials accused NATO of supporting what they called Kosovar Albanian terrorists, seeking to create an ethnically pure independent state. NATO says atrocities by Serbian forces in the province are causing a humanitarian disaster not seen in Europe since the end of World War II. More than 500,000 people are said to have fled their homes in Kosovo. Tens of thousands have streamed across the border, and that is causing a major refugee crisis in the region.
NATO says the airstrikes are intended to degrade Yugoslav military strength to the point that Belgrade can no longer oppress Kosovo's ethnic Albanian population. The Yugoslav military still appears to be a formidable foe, though, especially after the crash of one of NATO's most advanced warplanes. CNN's Brent Sadler is monitoring developments in Yugoslavia.
The early hours of Monday morning, and Serbian television goes on the air with these dramatic pictures of fires raging out of control in Kosovo. The infernos were said to be destroying non-military areas in the capital Pristina and coincided with the widening of NATO's attack strategy. Journalists are taken to the wreckage of the United States F-117 stealth fighter, claimed by Yugoslavia to have been brought down by their air defenses. There are holes in sections of the stricken warplane. Telltale signs, says the military here, it was shot down. As NATO strike forces move to escalate and widen the air campaign, Yugoslavia is stepping up condemnation of the attacks. Serbian television reports the bombardments are inflicting mounting damage in civilian areas. NATO says its strikes are aimed at destroying air defenses and Yugoslavia's military strength on the ground in Kosovo. But regardless of that strategy, the Belgrade authorities point to scenes of destruction. Secondary damage at Belgrade's civil airport at Surčin after one of the latest NATO raids Sunday. Damage to a monastery at Rakovica and bewildered clergy. Serbian reaction appears more defiant than emotional. Air raid shelters are places to be safe and to keep spirits high. It adds up to defiance, which a Yugoslav government minister visiting a damaged factory outside Belgrade says is understandable.
They are killing us, they are destroying our cities, they are killing our sons, they are destroying our property, they are bombing our country, and at the same time they have nothing against us.
In the darkness of a car-making plant in Kragujevac, some 80 miles southwest of Belgrade, workers told Serbian TV they were camping out, a further act of defiance, hoping their action might deter strikes against targets in their vicinity. In Belgrade itself, there was defiance of yet another kind. Rock music blasted from the city centre as thousands of anti-NATO protesters took to the streets. They carried clear messages to the NATO alliance. An exhibition of Serb unity organised by the city council. And at the top of Yugoslavia's stand sits President Slobodan Milosevic, giving no indication he'll submit to demands over Kosovo, even as NATO enters the second phase of bombing. Brent Sadler, CNN, Belgrade.
Belgrade television says the city is now under an air raid alert, and Yugoslavia's state news agency is reporting more damage throughout the nation. CNN's Carl Rochelle joins us now.
One of the high-tech weapons of war that they are bringing into this operation. The United Kingdom is also adding some more aircraft to the equation, and it is possible, as the air defenses go down, that we'll see the A-10 Warthog, the tank killer of a Gulf War, moving into operations. Part of the reason that they're holding back on some of those weapons is they wanted to make sure that the defenses, the air defenses, are down. There are still, of course, the possibilities that of shoulder-launched surface-to-air missiles like the U.S. Stinger missiles, which can provide some problems. So it'll have to be a sort of feel your way in, but expect, Colleen, that air campaign to continue escalating against Yugoslavia.
All right, Carl, now if tanks and ground troops are now the focus, to what extent does that make NATO planes more vulnerable than they were before?
They are more vulnerable because the lower they get down, the easier it is to hit them, particularly if they can throw up a curtain of fire. If you see the airplanes coming in, if you hear them coming in, you can throw down. A lot of these planes are very fast. You think of jet planes being very fast, but the attacks are actually carried out in the 300 to 350, 400 mile an hour range, not the 600 or 700 or 1,000 mile an hour range that some of them fly up in excess of Mach 1. So they're slower when they come in, they're carrying bombs underneath, and there are more of a target coming in that area. And remember, when they get down low, that shoulder-launched weapon, which has a range of something in the neighborhood of about a mile vertically to go up, they can see a target coming in, and depending on how good they are, they can try to shoot down aircraft that way. So yes, when they get into the close air support, getting down, hitting targets on the ground, it is more dangerous, and you can expect possibly to see more aircraft hit because of that, Colleen.
All right, CNN's Carl Rochelle at the Pentagon. Bettina?
Colleen, NATO spokesman Jamie Shea says more than 500,000 Kosovars are on the run. Shea says more than 50,000 have reached Kosovo's borders with Macedonia, Albania, and Montenegro. A United States administration official says the State Department is working to make sure relief agencies can handle the apparent exodus. As CNN's Mike Hanna reports, the refugees bring harrowing stories of survival with them.
The vanguard of the refugees appearing wraith-like through the mist. Having crossed the border, a crippling climb to the top of the mountain. A fleet of small vehicles moves up and down the road, ferrying those too young, too old, or too frail to walk. At the relative safety of the peak on Montenegrin soil, buses arrive to carry the refugees down the other side to the town of Rojahe. There, an opportunity to recount the horror of recent days, to tell of summary executions, of mass evictions, of Serb soldiers moving from their barracks into the now empty houses, and of thousands of people being taken away in covered trucks to an unknown destination.
The situation is very, very awful over there. Thousands of people were taken, we don't know where, last night. Our house is burning up, our shops, everything. If you don't have money over here, he kill. If you have money here, he kill again.
In one of the cars fleeing Kosovo, the region's Serbian archbishop, and from his staff, accounts of horrific atrocities taking place. The evidence is mounting. At the foot of these mountains, a massive forced removal is underway. It is brutal, but by all accounts, also systematic, coldly clinical. It appears this is not only angry Serb retaliation to the NATO attacks, rather a considered program of ethnic cleansing. Mike Hanna, CNN, on the Kosovo border.
And despite that stream of refugees, Yugoslavia denies its troops are carrying out a campaign of ethnic cleansing. Earlier on CNN, Yugoslavia's deputy prime minister blamed NATO troops for what he characterized as a sinister goal, the demise of Serbs in Kosovo.
Albanians, everyone, NATO can kill us, but no one can kill our love to our country, even our love to American people. We are not against American people. We are not against European. We are the part of Europe. We are Christians. Mr. Solana and Clark ordered the crime against all European Christian nation in the name and multi-ethnic, multicultural society with the aim to support Albanian terrorists in the aim to create Nazi, ethnic, pure Albanian state in the heart of Serbia.
Well, not surprisingly, ethnic Albanians in Kosovo take another view. A representative of the Kosovo Liberation Army says Serbian forces appear to be conducting a systematic campaign to wipe out the provincial capital, Pristina. Hashim Tachi was one of the KLA delegates who signed the peace accord in Paris. He says there have been mass killings in Kosovo.
Only last night in the city of Suhareka, more than 30 people were executed. And in a village called Goden, which is in the border region with Albania, 22 teachers were hanged in front of their students. And today in the village called Bela Crk in Suharek, many people were executed and killed.
Tachi's claims have not been independently confirmed. He went on to say NATO should send in ground troops to help protect the civilian population. Well, just ahead as our special Kosovo coverage continues, an attack on the United States Embassy in Moscow. As hundreds protest the NATO airstrike.
Space, aviation, industry, homes, buildings. We apply control solutions that improve people's lives every day, throughout the world, throughout your life. We are Honeywell.
We all have dreams, but the world is full of risk, and we wonder. Go ahead. Go ahead with a world leader in insurance and investment. Go ahead. Go ahead with a group that manages $600 billion in assets. Go ahead. We will help you reach your goals. Go ahead. Go ahead with AXA.
Due to regional time changes, most CNN programming will be seen 1 hour later. CNN will return to its regular schedule on April 4th.
NATO is getting additional support for its campaign against Yugoslavia. British Defense Secretary George Robertson says 4 more Harrier jets will join the NATO mission, and other countries are expected to send more weaponry as well. CNN's Jane Araf joins us now from Brussels with more on NATO's position. Jane?
Well, Colleen, officials here overnight quickly denying a Serb report that 2 of their planes had been shot down and a 3rd hit over Serbia overnight. They're still applauding the rescue of an American pilot whose plane crashed well behind enemy lines on Saturday. Meanwhile, NATO's strategy took shape on the ground overnight with intensified air attacks and what officials here call the 2nd phase of their campaign to weaken the military capability of President Slobodan Milosevic and bomb him back to the negotiating table. As we saw earlier, Serb TV showed parts of Pristina, the provincial capital, in flames, while explosions were heard as far as 50 kilometers away. The reason NATO has stepped up its air campaign, what officials here are calling a humanitarian crisis of historical proportions.
A lot of people are going to suffer.
And interviews with some of Asia's key newsmakers.
For the sake of the country and national economy, I hope they could succeed.
Look to Biz Asia with Lorraine Hahn, the world's leader in Asian financial news.
This is CNN.
Oh, interesting, my lid. Half a million ethnic Albanians reportedly driven from their homes in Kosovo. Yugoslavia denies genocide is prompting the refugee crisis. And NATO's warplanes broaden their attacks. Hello and welcome. I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center in Atlanta. And I'm Juanita Phillips in London. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to our viewers joining us in the United States. It's now 6 days since Operation Allied Force was launched by NATO against Yugoslavia. Now, thousands of new refugees, mainly women and children, are flooding into Albania and Macedonia from Kosovo. NATO says a total of 500,000 ethnic Albanians have been driven from their homes. CNN's Matthew Chance is in Macedonia's capital, Skopje.
With no relief from the violence in Kosovo, tens of thousands of its people are heading for the borders. On the Macedonian frontier, a steady flow of ethnic Albanian refugees are leaving behind their homes. Most say their villages have already been torched by Yugoslav troops or paramilitary Serb gangs, embarked, they say, on a campaign of ethnic cleansing. I've seen massacres in Kosovo, says this man. I've seen the Serbs cutting people's throats. Albania itself is also bracing for a major influx of Kosovars. Thousands have already crossed from the province. Aid workers say thousands more are waiting to get through. With reports of travel documents being seized by Yugoslav border guards, there's concern many of these refugees will never be allowed home. There's also widespread alarm at the apparent low numbers of young Kosovar men. NATO says the Yugoslav leadership must explain why these refugees are mostly wives and daughters. With no one from the international community on the ground in Kosovo, reports of summary executions of men between the ages of 16 and 60 cannot be independently verified.
People are pretty much holed up in their houses. They're very afraid to go outdoors. They've stockpiled food. They're running out of food, and there's a pretty grim feeling, I think, on their part that worse may still lie ahead.
With its tanks on the Macedonian border watching the flow of refugees, NATO says it's gathering evidence for possible charges of genocide. Macedonia is already straining under the weight of 20,000 refugees. An impoverished Albania is hardly equipped to deal with a similar influx. And there are growing concerns that one humanitarian crisis in Kosovo maybe causing several others in the countries next door. Matthew Chance, CNN, Skopje, Macedonia.
Despite the stream of ethnic Albanian refugees fleeing their homes, Yugoslavia denies its troops are carrying out a campaign of ethnic cleansing. Earlier on CNN, Yugoslavia's deputy prime minister blamed NATO forces for what he characterized as a sinister goal, the demise of Serbs in Kosovo.
Albanians, everyone, NATO can kill us, but no one can kill our love to our country, even our love to American people. We are not against American people. We are not against European. We are the part of Europe. We are Christians. Mr. Solana and Clark ordered the crime against all European Christian nation in the name and multi-ethnic, multicultural society with the aim to support Albanian terrorists in the aim to create, Nazi, ethnic, pure Albanian state in the heart of Serbia.
NATO forces launched another night of attacks against Yugoslavia on Sunday. The alliance is now in what it calls the second phase of its operation. For more on what that entails, we're joined now live from NATO headquarters in Brussels by CNN's Jane Arath. Jane.
Juanita, NATO officials will be assessing the damage from those escalated airstrikes overnight. They've widened their attacks on Serb targets in what they call at phase 2 of their campaign to weaken the military capability of President Slobodan Milosevic and bomb him back to the negotiating table. They're also trying to stop what they say is developing into a humanitarian crisis of historical proportions.
Whether we like it or not, we have to recognize that we are on the brink of a major humanitarian disaster in Kosovo, the likes of which have not been seen in Europe since the closing stages of World War II. We now estimate that the number of people displaced from their homes in Kosovo has gone over the 500,000 mark.
As the strikes continued, Serb TV reported parts of Pristina, the provincial capital in Kosovo, in flames overnight, while explosions from the strikes were heard as far as 50 kilometers away in the Macedonian capital. Officials overnight quickly denied Serb reports, though, that they had shot down 2 NATO planes and hit another one over Serbia. Officials here were still applauding the rescue of an American pilot whose plane crashed well behind enemy lines on Saturday. They said, however, that all the planes that went out Sunday returned safely to base. Juanita?
So, Jane, as far as the campaign goes, what's going to be happening today?
Well, NATO officials here have promised an update on what more they can expect to continue their escalated campaign. Britain has already said it will provide more planes, and officials here say they may have details on what they might get from the others of the 19 member states. Military officials here will also be keeping a close eye on the weather. Cloudy skies are forecast for the next couple of days. It won't stop the attacks, but it may affect the type of raids that NATO will carry out. Juanita?
And Jane, does this second phase of the campaign place the NATO troops in more danger than the first one?
It does, because in widening the targets, they will have to be pursuing a different strategy. For instance, flying lower than they normally would, which of course puts them at risk. Officials here emphasize that throughout this campaign has been a last resort. And although they will not specifically say that they've escalated it in response to what they call this historical humanitarian crisis, that certainly is on their minds. They have from the start, though, warned that they could expect to lose planes and by definition lose pilots as well. So they have been preparing people for what they hope will not happen, the loss of any of their planes or pilots during this escalated campaign. Juanita?
Jane Arath in Brussels, thanks very much. Colleen.
Thanks, Juanita. The United States Defense Secretary William Cohen continues to say there are no plans to send a ground force into Kosovo. For more on Washington's perspective on the conflict and the latest on that rescue of the pilot of a United States stealth fighter that went down in Serbia, we are joined by CNN's Carl Rochelle at the Pentagon. Carl?
Colleen, that point about the ground troops, they are very constant, very consistent about that, not just in the United States, but also in the United Kingdom, too. Both have troops poised to participate in keeping the peace if an agreement is signed by both sides, and they say that is the key. Only after an agreement is signed. Before that, they have no intention of putting ground troops in, will not even consider that. And I think there would be a great deal of political pressure in the United States from Congress and from the public if they anticipated putting ground troops in right now. The rescue of that pilot, they're not going to give you details because they're afraid that they may have to use those same techniques again. Yes, they do have search and rescue. We knew they had search and rescue operations in place all along. They have also not just search and rescue, but combat search and rescue, which means they have armed personnel ready to go in and extricate someone from under hostile fire if they absolutely have to. But how they contacted the pilot, how the pilot contacted them, and how they operated it, they're not going to say. Perhaps after all of this is over with, they'll come back and give you some details on that. They moved into a 5th day of operations yesterday, stepping it up a little bit. There were B-52 launches, there were B-2 launches, and more planes taking off from the air base in Aviano in Italy, heading in to hit targets in that area. The second phase they're into now concentrates more on the troops and the hardware they have, the tanks, the artillery, the armored personnel carriers, and also it's concentrating on some of the police headquarters. One of those was hit in the area of Pristina yesterday. So they're trying to take out those targets and the targets that could provide hardware and support for them, vehicles, munitions, power, anything along that line. Those are what the targets look like. Sandy Berger says, the president's national security advisor, says they're going to keep the pressure on until they stop the killing in Kosovo.
Our objectives here are to substantially increase the cost to Mr. Milosevic of the kind of atrocities that he's now committing in Kosovo, forcing people across the border, burning villages, murdering people, and if necessary to seriously damage his military capability to conduct these kinds of operations in the future. We believe we can achieve that mission with a sustained air campaign if we stay the course. We do not believe that sending several 100,000 soldiers into Serbia to occupy the country for the next several years is an option that is necessary.
But the U.S. has stepped up its participation to some extent. It is sending 4 more of the B-52 bombers into Fairford in the United Kingdom, where they will be used to launch the air-launched cruise missiles onto targets in Yugoslavia. The UK, by the way, is also adding a number of other aircraft of their own to bring into the operations now today. They'll be going back looking at the after-damage footage, trying to figure out exactly what they hit, what needs to be hit, and they'll also be taking a look at some of that air defense hardware to see if they've taken it out and if it's any safer on the ground, Colleen.
All right, Carl, so this is being called Phase 2. Have you been given any suggestion there by officials as to what might come after a Phase 2?
Well, they talk about a Phase 3, but they only talk about an air campaign. They're not talking about putting anything on the ground. It seems to me like a Phase 3, and there are no details of that available to us yet, maybe concentrating more on the specific units that are going in, the Serbian units that have been going in to Kosovo to take down some of the Kosovars in the country. So they may be looking more specifically at that. Certainly, as they move along in these phases, they will stop using the high-level attacks and move into the low-level attacks where they can get down close to the ground and hit targets on the ground and try to take out, as they said in the beginning, the capability of the Yugoslav forces to move in and operate in those areas. So that's what it looks like, but it's still an air campaign all the way through. That's all they are talking about, Colleen.
All right, CNN's Carl Rochelle updating us from the Pentagon. And still to come on CNN, as thousands of ethnic Albanians flee Kosovo, we speak to a representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. What can be done to ease their plight? That's right after this short break. Stay with us.
No wonder people say our in-flight service is legendary.
It is built in November and melts in April, 100 miles above the Arctic Circle. Sweden's ice hotel proves that winter can be tamed, controlled, rather enjoyed. A realization some guests arrive at before they arrive. The all-wheel drive Volvo Cross Country.
Due to regional time changes, most CNN programming will be seen 1 hour later. CNN will return to its regular schedule on April 4th.
Welcome back. For more now on the refugee crisis that the fighting in Kosovo has produced, I'm joined here in London by Lyndall Sachs. She's from the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Lyndall, just describe the extent of the refugee crisis for us.
We estimate that there are around about 500,000 people who've been affected by this conflict. We have around about 280,000 within Kosovo itself who've been displaced. But more worrying, we've got large numbers of people who've been pushed across the border. An estimated 10,000 people have fled across into Albania over the past couple of days. We're expecting more. Similarly, there's been an ongoing population movement into Macedonia. Bosnia itself has received around about 14,000 since the conflict broke out.
That's a massive influx of people for these small countries surrounding the area. How are they coping with it?
With great difficulty. These are poor countries to begin with, particularly Albania. Albania had a pre-existing refugee population of 18,000. That was from the conflict late last year. Clearly, the international community must step in to support these countries, particularly bearing in mind that their resources are so limited.
Has the NATO bombing made this situation worse, or was this going to happen anyway, as NATO claims?
It's always difficult to have 20/20 vision with hindsight. But if you look at the situation before the bombing began, there were 80,000 people displaced by the conflict in the 4 weeks since the Rambouillet talks began. Similarly, just last weekend, 25,000 people were forced from their homes in the Drenica-Srbica area. So it's difficult to say whether or not there has been an impact, but clearly all indications were that it was not going to get any better.
All right.
NATO widens its air war on Yugoslavia, striking Serb ground forces in Kosovo.
Albanians flee the war-torn province with reports of Serbian atrocities.
And in Paraguay, a week of political strife ends with the president's resignation. And welcome to our viewers around the world. I'm Bettina Lüscher in Berlin.
And I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center in Atlanta. Yugoslav officials are assessing the damage from a fifth night of airstrikes as NATO begins a new phase in its campaign. NATO missiles pounded Kosovo's capital, Pristina, on Sunday. Belgrade television reports the missiles hit the city's police headquarters. NATO says it is now targeting Yugoslav forces and Serb police in Kosovo, as well as their supply lines. NATO officials say this phase 2 of the strikes is aimed at ending the Serb offensive against ethnic Albanians in Kosovo. International relief agencies are racing to cope with the growing refugee problem in the region. NATO says more than 500,000 Kosovars are on the run. Belgrade television reports that Yugoslav officials have so far given 3 Russian envoys a cool reception. The envoys are demanding an immediate end to the Serb offensive and the NATO airstrikes.
Well, Serb action on the ground and NATO forces in the air have prompted an exodus from Kosovo. thousands of people have crossed Yugoslavia's borders into other Balkan nations. Neighboring countries are calling for international aid to deal with the growing crisis. Refugees are also streaming into Montenegro, Serbia's sister republic. CNN's Mike Hanna is in Montenegro.
The vanguard of the refugees appearing wraith-like through the mist. Having crossed the border, a crippling climb to the top of the mountain. A fleet of small vehicles moves up and down the road, ferrying those too young, too old, or too frail to walk. At the relative safety of the peak on Montenegrin soil, buses arrive to carry the refugees down the other side to the town of Rojahe. There, an opportunity to recount the horror of recent days, to tell of summary executions, of mass evictions, of Serb soldiers moving from their barracks into the now empty houses, and of thousands of people being taken away in covered trucks to an unknown destination.
The situation is very, very awful over there. Thousands of people were taken, we don't know where, last night.
Our house is burning up, our shops, everything. If you don't have money over here, he kill. If you have money here, he kill again.
In one of the cars fleeing Kosovo, the region's Serbian archbishop, and from his staff, accounts of horrific atrocities taking place. The evidence is mounting. At the foot of these mountains, a massive forced removal is underway. It is brutal, but by all accounts, also systematic, coldly clinical. It appears this is not only angry Serb retaliation to the NATO attacks, rather a considered program of ethnic cleansing. Mike Hanna, CNN, on the Kosovo border.
Yugoslavia denies its forces are carrying out a campaign of ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. Officials say they are trying to rid the area of what they call terrorists. And they say Kosovars are actually fleeing out of fear of NATO airstrikes. Still, there are those who say a genocide is being carried out. But is it? CNN's Jonathan Aiken has that.
What's happening in Kosovo has been called ethnic cleansing, the wholesale removal of ethnic populations. But is it genocide? Britain's defense secretary thinks so.
That we are confronting a regime which is intent on genocide.
Some legal analysts do as well, citing a 1948 UN convention.
I think it's genocide by probably any definition, but specifically it's genocide by the definition of the Convention Against Genocide, which over 100 countries are parties to, including the United States, Europe, most of Europe, and Yugoslavia.
The UN Convention signed in 1948 says genocide involves the intent to destroy, whether in whole or in part, any national, ethnic, religious, or racial group.
But so far, the Clinton administration has used the word sparingly and only in connection with the International War Crimes Tribunal.
We will continue to work with the prosecutor of the International Tribunal to assist her efforts to prosecute anyone responsible for ordering and carrying out war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide in Kosovo.
The 1948 convention says signatory nations may ask the UN to take such action as they consider appropriate for the prevention and suppression of acts of genocide. NATO hasn't asked for and says it doesn't need UN approval for Operation Allied Force. And the UN has sanctioned military actions in the past in the name of regional security, like Bosnia. The U.S. says the brutal behavior of the Serbs leaves little room for ambiguity.
We've seen a pattern of this in Bosnia, and we've seen a pattern of this in Croatia, and a pattern of this in Slovenia, that it is better to act now than to wait.
If the definition of genocide is sometimes vague, the reality is usually far too clear. The Holocaust, Rwanda, and Bosnia, all crimes against humanity. For the U.S., there may be a strategic reason to be reticent. The man who some say is the architect of genocide in the Balkans may be the person NATO has to negotiate with to end it. Jonathan Aiken for CNN, Washington.
NATO forces are expected to send additional weaponry to help with Phase 2 of the campaign. CNN's Jim Bitterman joins us now live at Aviano Air Force Base in Italy. Jim?
Colleen, some early morning takeoffs here at the Aviano base, including an AWACS radar surveillance plane which took off just a few minutes ago. We expect to see more daylight operations as NATO moves into that second phase of their operation. The second phase, which depends in very many strong ways on the, very many important ways, on the mastery of the skies over Yugoslavia, and NATO may not be quite there yet. In fact, British Harrier pilots working off a base to the south of here reported this morning that they had overnight encountered very strong anti-aircraft resistance from the ground. For more on the overnight activities, here is CNN's Ben Wiedemann.
A steady stream of aircraft takes off from Aviano Air Base as the NATO air campaign against Yugoslavia enters its fifth night. The offensive is now well into its second phase, which is targeting Serb tanks, artillery, and military personnel in Kosovo. F-117 stealth fighters continue to take part in the action, despite the crash of one of these fighters Saturday night outside Belgrade. NATO says the cause of the crash remains unknown, and that the pilot was plucked from behind enemy lines in an operation that remains a highly guarded secret.
You all have, as we've had, the excellent news that the pilot was rescued and is in good physical shape. He's now at Aviano in Italy receiving medical treatment.
NATO officials say their pilots are up against a formidable foe.
This was a very sophisticated air defense system. Some people talk of a David and Goliath fight. Well, I can assure you that it's not that case. We are up against a very hostile, very well-trained and sophisticated environment which has trained for many years.
The airstrikes have taken on a new urgency as reports trickle out of Kosovo of a ruthless Serb crackdown on ethnic Albanians. Western officials appear to be preparing for a protracted campaign.
This is not going to be quick, it's not going to be easy, it's a very tough environment.
The United States is dispatching more B-52 bombers to bolster the air armada arrayed against Yugoslavia. With diplomacy on the back burner, there appears to be no end in sight to this campaign. Ben Wiedemann, CNN, outside Aviano Air Base in Italy.
And among the targets hit last night was the main police station in Pristina, the capital of Kosovo. Bettina?
Thank you very much, Jim Bitterman in Aviano Air Base. Well, British warplanes have been among the NATO forces striking targets in Yugoslavia.
Stand by.
I apologize. We have actually just lost our Berlin feed, but I understand we do have the British Defense Minister on the line, George Robertson. Can you hear me? It's Colleen in Atlanta.
Colleen in Atlanta.
Hear you, Colleen. Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry, we have had some technical problems in Berlin, but can we start by asking you what you've heard in terms of any hard, firm reports that there is ethnic cleansing going on in Kosovo?
Oh, there is huge ethnic cleansing going on. Whole villages are being emptied, bombarded. Some of them no longer exist. You know, that is the chilling description I got from some of our people. Villages no longer exist. People are being driven out, families are being separated, and the men are being killed. There are atrocities being reported now on a day and daily basis from the most authoritative of sources. So what we predicted was going to happen is now happening. The level of violence was increasing before the air attacks started, and indeed that is why these air attacks have taken place. And to those who say that we're causing that violence or the air attacks have increased the violence, I would say they didn't. It started before, but it will only be NATO airstrikes that will stop the violence.
But there are those who argue, just to pick up on that, that it has actually expedited the violence, that it's added an opportunity for Mr. Milosevic to commit these alleged crimes. How would you respond to that criticism?
Well, by saying that the violence was increasing very fast before the air attacks took place, and without the air attacks, he would probably have been able to clear Kosovo by now. But day by day, Allied airplanes and cruise missiles have made a huge impact on the military machine on which Milosevic depends. So day by day, we are causing huge disruptive damage to that machine and forcing, I believe, behind the scenes, the leadership to rethink and the military commanders to worry whether this man is not taking them towards national suicide.
If this does turn out to be proven to be an act of war crime or genocide, do you think that those responsible could be brought to trial?
Well, each day I've warned the military commanders who would accept the orders from Belgrade that there is an international criminal tribunal in The Hague, that we will send what information we have, and it is very considerable, to The Hague, and that they should not ever think that they will be allowed to get away with what they are doing just now or what they might do in succeeding days. So there are decent people inside the Yugoslav army, there are good people inside Serbia. A lot of horrifying things are being done in their name, and it is time for them to speak up and to get Milosevic to think again.
Mr. Robertson, there have been reports that anti-aircraft fire against British warplanes in particular has picked up. Can you tell us anything more about that?
Well, I'm going to Gioia del Colle Air Base in Italy this afternoon, and I'll hear it firsthand from our Harrier pilots, the sort of dangers that they are going into night by night. And I know that the other 18 countries involved in this are reporting the same thing. The Yugoslav integrated air defense system has been dealt a fairly heavy blow, but it is not dead yet. So there are still high risks involved in what we're doing. But today we're starting the intensified bombing campaign, not just against air defense, but against serious military targets, including those on the ground who are perpetrating the murders at the present moment. And I would expect that that will now start to have a seriously disruptive effect on the systematic violence that appears now to be the name of the game inside Kosovo.
Mr. Secretary, are you confident that the NATO alliance can be held together and can be held united?
The NATO alliance is united. I've spoken to a number of my colleagues, and we're in frequent communication with each other. The resolve is there, the determination is there, the stomach is still there. But remember, we are democracies. There are 19 governments, 19 parliaments, 19 defence ministers involved here. And it's quite possible to exaggerate the nuances of approach that can be taken sometimes in public statements. But the alliance moved from phase 1 to phase 2 of this bombing campaign with no dissension on Saturday night. The resolve is still there to continue with these air attacks and to blunt the sharp end of the Milosevic killing machine. And I have no doubt that democratic countries and democratic populations who are seeing the sort of misery and trauma that is spilling now over the borders of Kosovo is not going to give up at this time. If we were to lose here and Milosevic was to win, ethnic cleansers would be given the green light all over the world.
All right, British Defense Secretary George Robertson, thank you very much for joining us. And now back to Bettina.
And just ahead, as our special Kosovo coverage continues, fleeing Kosovo refugees say they suffered terrible treatment by Serbian forces. We'll examine the reports of the alleged atrocities. And as NATO's bombardment of Yugoslavia increases, so does the pressure to halt the strikes.
A rich and magnificent culture. No wonder people say our in-flight service is legendary.
Due to regional time changes, most CNN programming will be seen 1 hour later. CNN will return to its regular schedule on April 4th.
Y2K, the buzzword around the world for computer shutdown at the dawn of a new millennium. In a full week of special programming, CNN takes on the year 2000 from every angle.
Find out what really makes them tick. Spend Tuesdays with the winners. Watch the business magazine on TV, Newsstand Fortune.
On Wednesday, Business Unusual shows how creativity, leadership and inspiration are the keys to success.
Science and technology every Thursday lunchtime is CNN's window into the future. And for the end of the week, Earth Matters, the world's only global environmental program.
New insights into business and technology Monday to Friday at lunchtime.
For the broader view, CNN.
NATO widens its target list as it enters phase 2 of its strikes against Yugoslavia. Tirana says 60,000 new ethnic Albanian refugees have crossed the border into Albania. And protests against the US embassy in Moscow turn violent as Russian officials work on a diplomatic initiative to end the conflict. Hello, I'm Juanita Phillips in London. Welcome to our viewers joining us from the United States. Here are the latest developments on the Kosovo conflict. NATO pounded military targets in Yugoslavia overnight as alliance officials announced they were now in the second phase of their operation. A series of powerful blasts shook Kosovo's provincial capital Pristina on Sunday. NATO says 500,000 ethnic Albanians have fled their homes in what officials call the worst refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. NATO officials have also accused Yugoslav forces of conducting a scorched earth policy in Kosovo. Yugoslavia is denying reports that Serb attacks against ethnic Albanians are on the rise. And France is calling on Russia to pressure the Yugoslav authorities into working towards a diplomatic initiative. As NATO pushes ahead with its war against Yugoslavia, it is widening the list of targets. CNN's Jim Bitterman joins us now live from the Aviano Air Base in Italy, a major staging area for the strikes. Jim.
Juanita, some early morning air activity here at the base at Aviano. We saw an AWACS go out about an hour ago, and then a squadron of F-16s that went out earlier this morning came back to base just within the last hour. We expect to see more daylight activity as NATO moves into phase 2 of its operations. Having said that, however, phase 2 depends a lot on the mastery of the skies over Yugoslavia, and NATO may not quite be there yet. British Harrier pilots reported this morning when they came back that they had encountered stiff anti-aircraft resistance over Yugoslavia overnight. For more on the overnight activities, here is CNN's Ben Wiedemann.
A steady stream of aircraft takes off from Aviano Air Base as the NATO air campaign against Yugoslavia enters its 5th night. The offensive is now well into its 2nd phase, which is targeting Serb tanks, artillery, and military personnel in Kosovo. F-117 stealth fighters continue to take part in the action, despite the crash of one of these fighters Saturday night outside Belgrade. NATO says the cause of the crash remains unknown, and that the pilot was plucked from behind enemy lines in an operation that remains a highly guarded secret.
You all have, as we've had, the excellent news that the pilot was rescued and is in good physical shape. He's now at Aviano in Italy receiving medical treatment.
NATO officials say their pilots are up against a formidable foe.
This was a very sophisticated air defense system. Some people talk of a David and Goliath fight. Well, I can assure you that it's not that case. We are up against a very hostile, very well-trained and sophisticated environment, which has trained for many years.
The airstrikes have taken on a new urgency as reports trickle out of Kosovo of a ruthless Serb crackdown on ethnic Albanians. Western officials appear to be preparing for a protracted campaign.
This is not going to be quick. It's not going to be easy. It's a very tough environment.
CNN's Ben Wiedemann reporting there. One of the targets hit overnight last night, apparently, according to Belgrade television, was the main police station in Pristina. Juanita?
Jim Bitterman at the Aviano Air Base, thanks very much. Well, defense officials in Europe and the United States have been very tight-lipped about the downing of a U.S. stealth fighter in Yugoslavia over the weekend. Yugoslavia says its forces shot down the F-117A Nighthawk. Authorities in the United States will not confirm that, nor say what brought down the jet. CNN's Carl Rochelle joins us live with details on that and other news from the Pentagon. Carl, what's the latest?
Well, Juanita, about all they will say is that the airplane went down. They won't say whether it was shot down, whether it broke down. They don't, if they know exactly what happened, they don't want to tell. Now, of course, they have debriefed the pilot, and he has told them what was going through his mind, what was happening in the airplane at the end of it. But the real reason they don't want anyone to know what brought that plane down is they don't want to give a message to the Yugoslavs. If they did something and did it just right, or if they got just lucky, they don't want them to know so they can repeat it. So I don't expect that we'll learn anything about what caused that airplane to go down for some time. What they are doing now is assessing yesterday's strike, the fifth set of strikes against targets in Yugoslavia, to see if they knock down the targets they intended to, if they are totally damaged, if they need to go back and restrike some of the targets to do that again. But as they step up the operations in this phase 2 of the campaign against Yugoslavia, the British Minister of Defense acknowledged that the more they put into it, the more they're going to see from the air defenses of Yugoslavia.
Well, I'm going to Gioia del Colle Air Base in Italy this afternoon, and I'll hear it firsthand from our Harrier pilots, the sort of dangers that they are going into night by night. And I know that the other 18 countries involved in this are reporting the same thing. The Yugoslav integrated air defense system has been dealt a fairly heavy blow, but it is not dead yet. So there are still high risks involved in what we're doing. But today we're starting the intensified bombing campaign, not just against air defense, but against serious military targets, including those on the ground who are perpetrating the murders at the present moment. And I would expect that that will now start to have a seriously disruptive effect on the systematic violence that appears now to be the name of the game inside Kosovo.
That is phase 2, those targets, the tanks, the troops, the armored personnel carriers, the artillery pieces that have been used in the attacks on the Kosovars. That's what they'll be targeting. They're going to be moving in with the British Harriers. At some point, they'll bring in the A-10 Warthog aircraft, which are a close air support attack aircraft. They use a Gatling gun, not a Gatling gun, a GAW is what the gun is really called. It's a 30-millimeter anti-tank gun that fires a depleted uranium round through a long barrel out the nose, and it used Maverick missiles. It was a tank killer during the Desert Storm operations during the Gulf War. That's expected to see a lot of use, but it flies low to the ground, it flies slow. It is a well-armored aircraft, but it is also vulnerable to things like the shoulder-mounted surface-to-air SA-7 Grail anti-aircraft weapons that the Yugoslavs do have in their arsenals, along with the SA-2s, 3s, and 6s. So it could heat up in the campaign. That is one of the things they are concerned about, but they won't know for sure whether they've got those air defenses down, Juanita, until they actually come in with those airplanes flying close to the ground.
Carl Rochelle in Washington, thanks very much. A representative of the Kosovo Liberation Army is calling for NATO ground forces in the province to help protect ethnic Albanian civilians. Hashim Taci says this is, quote, the hour of need for Kosovo. But a notorious Yugoslav paramilitary leader has sent a warning to United States President Bill Clinton. Zelko Raznatovic, known as Arkan, says it would be a mistake for NATO to go into Kosovo with ground troops.
They are telling to the world that I'm in Kosovo and I'm here in Belgrade. I'm not yet in Kosovo, but I promise them the minute the ground troops are in Kosovo, NATO ground troops are in Kosovo, I will be there for sure. In Vietnam, United States, they came first France, then United States, they came first bombing and then with the ground troops. So I think they can do the same mistake here. NATO, and they will have a new Vietnam in the heart of Europe, for sure.
Albania's Deputy Prime Minister says more than 60,000 refugees fleeing the fighting in Kosovo have entered the northern part of Albania over the past 35 hours. Albanian President Recep Mejdani called for foreign help with the influx on Sunday. Albania is one of the world's poorest countries. Mejdani has asked for aid for the refugees and also for troops to intervene in Kosovo. NATO officials say Belgrade has engaged in a deliberate ethnic cleansing policy against ethnic Albanians in Kosovo. That's a charge the Yugoslav authorities have denied. Thousands of ethnic Albanians have also been pouring into neighboring Macedonia and the Yugoslav Republic of Montenegro. And CNN's Mike Hanna joins us live now from Montenegro, where refugees have brought some harrowing stories of survival with them. Mike?
Well, Juanita, officials say that more than 10,000 refugees have crossed into Montenegro in the past 24 hours alone. They are gathering in the town of Rojahe in eastern Montenegro. But the sense of deep concern here is that this is just the thin edge of the wedge. The vanguard of the refugees appearing wraith-like through the mist. Having crossed the border, a crippling climb to the top of the mountain. A fleet of small vehicles moves up and down the road, ferrying those too young, too old, or too frail to walk. At the relative safety of the peak on Montenegrin soil, buses arrive to carry the refugees down the other side to the town of Rojahe. There, an opportunity to recount the horror of recent days, to tell of summary executions, of mass evictions, of Serb soldiers moving from their barracks into the now empty houses, and of thousands of people being taken away in covered trucks to an unknown destination.
The situation is very, very awful over there. Thousands of people were taken, we don't know where, last night.
Our house is burning up, our shops, everything. If you don't have money over here, he kill. If you have money here, he kill again.
In one of the cars fleeing Kosovo, the region's Serbian Archbishop, and from his staff, accounts of horrific atrocities taking place. The evidence is mounting. At the foot of these mountains, a massive forced removal is underway. It is brutal, but by all accounts, also systematic, coldly clinical. It appears this is not only angry Serb retaliation to the NATO attacks, rather a considered program of ethnic cleansing. An unconfirmed report from the town of Peć, which is Kosovo's second largest with a population of some 90,000, says residents have been told that they have to board buses Monday. Apparently a roster has been given to establish the order in which they board the buses. If they do not, the report says, they've been told that they will be killed. Juanita.
Mike, a point worth making. Montenegro, of course, is part of Yugoslavia. What is its position on the NATO airstrikes?
Well, certainly it's a very difficult position for Montenegro. As you say, it is part of the Yugoslav Federal Republic. However, it has been clear from the beginning, it has declared its neutrality. It has been highly critical of Belgrade's leader, Slobodan Milosevic, but at the same time it's called on NATO to stop the bombings. It is said that the solution to Kosovo cannot be found through violence. It has attempted to maintain this neutral stance, but it itself has been a target. There are Yugoslav federal military positions within the area. We did have yet another strike on Montenegrin soil yesterday. So it is a country caught right in the middle. Montenegrins themselves do not quite know understand what is going on. They understand that they are a democracy, they are seeking closer ties to the West, they have declared their neutrality, and yet at the same time they see military strikes taking place against their soil. So a very difficult situation for Montenegrins. Juanita.
Mike Hanna in Montenegro, thank you. And coming up on CNN, France and Russia launch new diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict in Kosovo.
It's true, and now it's available. The new Nokia communicator. See more at Nokia.com. Nokia, connecting people.
"24-hour lost card replacement. Another way American Express helps you do more." Membership rewards points never expire. Another way American Express helps you do more.
This is CNN's Lou Knox. He's been on the cutting edge of reporting business news for CNN for nearly 2 decades. Now he's going to great heights to bring you Business Unusual, the weekly program that explores the creative leadership that is changing how business is done. Want to succeed in business? Drop in on Business Unusual in association with Arthur Anderson, Sundays on CNN.
US has begun new efforts to find a diplomatic solution to the Kosovo conflict. President Jacques Chirac has asked Russian Prime Minister Yevgeny Primakov to persuade the Yugoslav government to
well-being. Wednesdays on CNN International, it's hot fashion news in style with Elsa Clench. Take off on Thursdays with Travel Now, the world's ultimate travel guide. And on Fridays, Inside Europe reveals the latest social and cultural trends shaping European life today. Expand your horizons every afternoon. For the broader view, CNN.
NATO adds firepower to its air armada over Yugoslavia, its prime target, Serbian ground forces. A flood of refugees raises concerns of a potential humanitarian disaster. Hello and welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Michael Holmes. Scenes of fire, devastation and human misery filled television broadcasts in Yugoslavia. NATO forces are pressing on with Phase 2 of Operation Allied Force. Serbian television showed pictures of what it said was a police administrative building that came under NATO attack in Pristina, the capital of Kosovo. NATO says it is targeting more of the Serb artillery, armour and command centres that are being used in Yugoslavia's fight against ethnic Albanians. Thousands of refugees are pouring out of Kosovo, causing a major crisis for many of Yugoslavia's neighbours. Yugoslav authorities deny reports that Serbian attacks on ethnic Albanians are on the rise. Well, CNN's Brent Sadler is in the Yugoslav capital of Belgrade. He files this report.
The early hours of Monday morning, and Serbian television goes on the air with these dramatic pictures of fires raging out of control in Kosovo. The infernos were said to be destroying non-military areas in the capital Pristina and coincided with the widening of NATO's attack strategy. Journalists are taken to the wreckage of the United States F-117 stealth fighter, claimed by Yugoslavia to have been brought down by their air defences. There are holes in sections of the stricken warplane. Telltale signs, says the military here, it was shot down. As NATO strike forces move to escalate and widen the air campaign, Yugoslavia is stepping up condemnation of the attacks. Serbian television reports the bombardments are inflicting mounting damage in civilian areas. NATO says its strikes are aimed at destroying air defences and Yugoslavia's military strength on the ground in Kosovo. But regardless of that strategy, the Belgrade authorities point to scenes of destruction. Secondary damage at Belgrade's civil airport at Surcin after one of the latest NATO raids Sunday. Damage to a monastery at Rakovica and bewildered clergy. Serbian reaction appears more defiant than emotional. Air raid shelters are places to be safe and to keep spirits high. It adds up to defiance, which a Yugoslav government minister visiting a damaged factory outside Belgrade says is understandable.
They are killing us, they are destroying our cities, they are killing our sons, they are destroying our property, they are bombing our country, and at the same time they have nothing against us.
In the darkness of a car-making plant in Kragujevac, some 80 miles southwest of Belgrade, workers told Serbian TV they were camping out, a further act of defiance, hoping their action might deter strikes against targets in their vicinity. In Belgrade itself, there was defiance of yet another kind. Rock music blasted from the city centre as thousands of anti-NATO protesters took to the streets. They carried clear messages to the NATO alliance. An exhibition of Serb unity organised by the city council. And at the top of Yugoslavia's stand sits President Slobodan Milosevic, giving no indication he'll submit to demands over Kosovo, even as NATO enters the second phase of bombing. Brent Sadler, CNN, Belgrade.
And joining us now live from the Yugoslav capital is CNN's Alessio Vinci. Alessio, bring us up to date, if you will.
Michael, it is a quiet Monday morning here in Belgrade, a big contrast to the heavy shelling south of here in the province of Kosovo. For the first time since the beginning of the air raids last week, the lights in the streets remained all night on. Within the last hour, sirens wailed once more, a warning to the population here that the city remains under the threat of air raids. The streets are quite empty right now. Public transportation runs at a reduced pace, and people find it harder and harder to move around. There is virtually no gas available for private use, as what's available is being used primarily by the medical sector. As I said, the calm here in Belgrade is in sharp contrast to the situation in Kosovo. We have just received fresh television pictures of the extensive damage after a night of heavy NATO bombardments in Pristina. Serb television reports that a dental clinic was hit, as well as the administration building of the central police station. No casualties were reported. Meanwhile, on the political front, a Russian delegation arrived here in Belgrade on Sunday after meeting with U.S. Balkan negotiator Richard Holbrooke in Budapest. The three prominent liberal politicians, among them a former prime minister, have so far met with Yugoslav Deputy Prime Minister Vuk Draskovic. I just spoke to one of them, the former Prime Minister Jego Gajdar, who told me their mission here is trying to get the Yugoslavs back to the negotiating table, something that appears at this point highly unlikely unless NATO halts its air raids. The Russian delegation has no mandate to negotiate on behalf of the Russian government, but President Boris Yeltsin, Gajdar told me, has been informed about their mission here, and he said that they strongly support it. Jego Gajdar also stressed that their simple presence here in Belgrade represents an important and positive step towards the possibility of reopening this dialogue between Yugoslavia and NATO countries. These three Russian politicians are viewed here in Belgrade as pro-Western. Gajdar told me that now they're not planning to meet with Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic. Michael.
Alessio, did you get a sense of any hope at all for the delegation to make some sort of breakthrough?
No, Mr. Gajdar just told me that he remains very skeptical about any breakthrough right now. I mean, the only person that is viewed to be able to, unblock the situation here is President Slobodan Milosevic, and at this point they're not meeting with him, or they're not planning to meet with him. So Mr. Gajdar, although remained very confident, that he was trying to stress the fact that the politicians from a friendly country, or viewed as a friendly country like Russia, are here in Belgrade is a very important and positive step. But he remained very skeptical about any possible breakthrough at this point, Michael.
Alessio, you mentioned the media coverage in Belgrade, Serbian television. Has the refugee situation been mentioned at all yet?
The refugee situation has not really been prominently mentioned in the television station here. The Serb television is controlled by the government here, and so far we've been seeing more the damage of more than 5 days of continuous air raids against Kosovo and Kosovo and other regions of Yugoslavia. Michael.
Okay, Alessio Vinci in Belgrade, thanks for that. Let's go now for an update to the Aviano Air Force Base in Italy. CNN's Jim Bitterman is standing by there. Jim.
Michael, there's been a little air activity this morning. We saw an AWACS go out of here, the air radar surveillance aircraft go out of here about 2 hours ago. Earlier this morning, some F-16s took off about 4 hours ago, and then we saw them coming back just within the last hour or so. We also seen some F-18s operating. You can maybe hear in the background here, there's an EA-6 Prowler electronic warfare aircraft warming up its engines here. So, I mean, there is some air activity. We're not seeing the kind of stepped-up air activity, however, we thought we would see when they move into Phase 2. We haven't seen, namely, the A-10 Warthogs fly out of here yet. Those are the aircraft that go after particular units on the ground. We haven't seen them leave here at all this morning. Michael?
Jim, I don't know if you've been able in the last day or two, or the last few hours, perhaps, to speak to any of the air crews or ground crews. Give us a sense of the mood there.
Well, I think there's a mood of anticipation, but of what is going to come next. This next mission, the next phase that NATO goes into, may be especially dangerous because it's going to be something that is carried out by some very low-flying and slow-flying aircraft, which are vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire. And having said that, one of the things that came out overnight was that British Harrier pilots who operate off a base about 200 miles from here reported that they came under very strong, very heavy anti-aircraft fire. So that's not something that'll sit well with the pilots of these slow and low-flying aircraft that'll have to be out over the skies of Yugoslavia. Michael?
Okay, Jim, thanks for that. Jim Bitterman there in Aviano, Italy. Now, there have been developments in Moscow. Moscow, of course, traditional ties to Belgrade. Let's go to CNN's Steve Harrigan. He joins us now live. Bring us up to date from there, Steve, if you will.
Well, Michael, there's developments here on two important fronts in Russia. First, the Russian news agency Interfax is reporting that the Russian Prime Minister, Yevgeny Primakov, this is according to the Prime Minister's press secretary, may go to Belgrade as early as tomorrow. That would be Tuesday. This is coming from the Russian news agency Interfax. So far, the Russian government has not confirmed that yet. On the other front, there's big news so far with the International Monetary Fund. As you know, the chief of the IMF, Michel Camdessus, is in Moscow to negotiate a more than $4 billion loan. That's money that Russia desperately needs. And Interfax as well is now reporting that the IMF chief, Michel Camdessus, told a leading Russian politician, Yegor Stroyev, that he, quote, has good news for Russia. So on these two fronts, one on the diplomatic front, a possible trip to Belgrade by the Russian Prime Minister Yevgeny Primakov, and second, on a decisive issue of importance for the Russian economy, hints from the IMF chief that there could be some good news in Russia for more than a $4 billion loan. That issue could be decided as early as today. Michael.
Steve, the trip by, or the potential trip by Mr. Primakov, any word on whether that is because of any sort of diplomatic development, or is he going just hoping for the best?
Well, there's no word on that yet. We're just really literally hearing this minutes ago. It would be a very high-level delegation should Mr. Primakov make the move. We've heard some rumors from the Russian Foreign Minister, Igor Ivanov. He's saying that in about an hour from now at his press conference, he expects to make a very important announcement. Certainly this could be such an announcement, one that many people here are waiting for. There's been an expectation in the air in Moscow that Russia, who has come out strongly against these NATO strikes and has been a traditional ally of the Serbs, a close ally in the past, might try to restart a diplomatic initiative, and we're hearing reports of such a restarting now. Michael.
Any talk there, Steve, that you've heard of the other delegation, the one in Belgrade that we were talking to Alessio Vinci about?
Right. Well, that delegation is made up of three very prominent Russian politicians, liberals, English speakers, all of them, people who have close ties to the West, but really who hold no government position right now. And the Russian Foreign Ministry has made it clear to state that they are not negotiating on behalf of the Russian government. What point this delegation is trying to make, though, is that it's trying to get Milosevic back to the bargaining table and also to warn Russia's Western partners just the damage that these strikes are causing in Russia between Russia and Western relations, the sort of the flow of public opinion and the negative attitude that these attacks are causing, the damage that they're doing to Russian-Western relations. Michael.
All right, Steve, thanks for that. Steve Harrigan in Moscow. Now we're going to take a short break on world news. Plenty more when we come back. Stay with us.
Wherever you are and whatever you do, Allianz with its global partners is the power on your side.
Y2K, the buzzword around the world for computer shutdown at the dawn of a new millennium.
In a full week of special programming, CNN takes on the year 2000 from every angle. From technology compliance to millennium marketing and celebrations. Look for daily reports, special editions of Q&A, Insight and Inside Europe, along with countdown specials from New Zealand and Jerusalem. Countdown to 2000, all this week, only on CNN.
Said at the beginning of the program, a major refugee crisis developing, and Albania and Macedonia are appealing to the international community for help with the flood of Kosovar refugees. NATO says more than 500,000 have fled their homes, with tens of thousands pouring into the two nations and Montenegro. We have two reports on the situation. The first is from CNN's Mike Hanna.
The vanguard of the refugees appearing wraith-like through the mist. Having crossed the border, a crippling climb to the top of the mountain. A fleet of small vehicles moves up and down the road, ferrying those too young, too old, or too frail to walk. At the
today, providing Spain with the latest news, sports, weather, and lifestyle programming. There's no better way to know what is happening in Spain, Europe, and the rest of the world. And add it plus to the world's best news channel.
This is CNN.
There are a lot of TV news magazines covering lots of stories, but when you want the big stories first, turn to CNN and Time. First on TV to reveal how a secret UN operation halted missile parts headed for Iraq.
We caught them red-handed.
First to report why women are murdered for disgracing their families.
No solution, no way but to kill them.
First to uncover how big city cops lower the crime rate by not reporting crimes.
It's a violation of public trust.
CNN and Time, bringing the big stories first to TV news magazines on CNN.
On the next CNN in Fortune, Cuba. To American business, it has long been the forbidden fruit.
Cuba is perceived as a high-risk country, so the returns have to be spectacular.
But for some international investors, the land of revolution is becoming the land of opportunity. Plus, securities analysts are fast becoming the stars of Wall Street.
They really believe that the industry they follow is one of the best.
Meet the profits on the next CNN in Fortune, Saturday on CNN.
Airstrikes begin to rain on Serb forces in Kosovo as NATO and Belgrade accuse each other of sparking a refugee crisis in the war-torn province. Hello and welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Michael Holmes. Russia is considering a top-level peace mission to try to end the NATO strikes on Yugoslavia. Prime Minister Yevgeny Primakov is expected in Belgrade on Tuesday. 3 unofficial Russian envoys are already in the Yugoslav capital, also trying to end the attacks. They say they're also demanding an end to Serb military action in Kosovo. NATO is pressing on with phase 2 of its air campaign in Yugoslavia. The alliance says it will target Yugoslav and Serb forces in Kosovo and try to disrupt their supply lines. Yugoslav authorities are assessing the damage from the 5th night of NATO air attacks. They say NATO missiles hit the police headquarters in the provincial capital, Pristina. Albania and Macedonia are asking the international community to help them cope with the influx of Kosovar refugees. NATO says more than 500,000 people have left their homes in Kosovo, with tens of thousands flooding into neighbouring countries. Well, Russia is using its ties with Belgrade to try to bring an end to the violence in Kosovo and the NATO airstrikes. As we said, CNN's Steve Harrigan joins us now live in Moscow. Steve, bring us up to date with the latest, if you will.
Well, Michael, just minutes ago we heard from the Russian government press service that, in fact, the Russian Prime Minister Yevgeny Primakov will travel to Belgrade. He'll be leaving Tuesday morning from Moscow at 10 a.m. This is a very high-level mission from the Russian government. Yevgeny Primakov, the Russian Prime Minister, and really the man who has been running things in Russia on a day-to-day operation over the past few months while Boris Yeltsin has been sick. Now, the Russians give two goals for Mr. Primakov, two stated goals so far. First is to halt the bombing, and second is to regulate the crisis. Now, the details are not known so far. We expect to hear more about that in a later press conference from the Foreign Ministry. But as of yet, there's no word whether the Russians do have some assurance about getting Yugoslav leader Slobodan Milosevic back to the bargaining table. Also up in the air is the exact itinerary of Mr. Primakov's schedule, where he will go. We know he's going to Belgrade first, but where next? That's something of a mystery. His press service has told us that Mr. Primakov will proceed on to one world capital, and it will not be Washington after Belgrade. But where he's going to next, we're going to have to wait for that press conference later this afternoon to find out. Michael?
Steve, we mentioned earlier the other delegation already in Belgrade. How seriously taken is that group?
Well, they are serious politicians. They are young reformers, liberals. All of them speak fluent English. They are politicians who have generally been seen as very close partners to the West, and they've been trying to find a role to mediate this crisis. But the Russian Foreign Ministry has taken pains to assure people that they are not representing the Russian government at this time. So they are a delegation. They are Russian leaders, leading politicians who have been in power before, but who presently do not hold government positions. So this flight tomorrow, if it goes ahead by Yevgeny Primakov, would be at a much higher level. Much more, Russia would be putting much more on the line by sending Mr. Primakov, a real test of Russia's prestige to see whether, in fact, it can restart some peace negotiations. Michael.
Thanks, Steve. Steve Harrigan there in Moscow. Now for more on Belgrade's reaction to Russia's plans and the NATO strike, CNN's Alessio Vinci joins us now from the Yugoslav capital. Alessio, bring us up to date and fill us in on the reaction there, if there is any, to this Russian delegation, this visit by Mr. Primakov, perhaps.
Michael, there is no reaction or confirmation to the visit by the Russian Prime Minister Primakov here in Belgrade tomorrow here. However, there is, as Steve Harrigan mentioned, a Russian delegation here, or of these three prominent liberal politicians, among them the former Prime Minister Igor Gaidar. Now, those politicians met yesterday first with Richard Holbrooke, the U.S. top Balkan negotiator in Budapest, and this morning so far they have met with Yugoslavia's Deputy Prime Minister Vuk Draskovic. I spoke just a few hours ago with one of the negotiators, the former Prime Minister Gaidar, who told me that their mission here is trying to get the Yugoslavs back to the negotiating table, something that appears at this point highly unlikely unless NATO halts its air raids against Yugoslavia. The Russian delegation here has no mandate to negotiate on behalf of the Russian government, but President Boris Yeltsin has been informed about their mission, and we're told he's strongly supporting it. Igor Gaidar also stressed that their simple presence here in Belgrade represents an important and positive step towards the possibility of reopening some kind of dialogue between Yugoslavia and NATO countries. These three Russian politicians are viewed here in Belgrade as pro-Western, and so far Gaidar has mentioned to me, has told me that he's not planning, him and his other colleagues are not planning to meet the Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic. Meanwhile, Serb television is showing pictures of several buildings on fire here in Pristina, reporting that Sunday night and early Monday morning the provincial capital was hit several times by NATO bombs and missiles, the heaviest bombardments, the TV reports, on Pristina so far since the beginning of the air raids. We've just received fresh television pictures of the extensive damage after last night's raid. Serb television reports that a dental clinic was hit, as well as the administration building of the central police station and several civilian buildings. 3 policemen also have been reported wounded. Here in Belgrade, it is quiet Monday morning, a big contrast to the heavy shelling south of here. For the first time since the beginning of the air raids last week, the lights in the city remained all night on. The streets are quite empty, though. Public transportation runs at a reduced pace, and people find it harder and harder to move around. There is virtually no gas available for private use, as what's available is being used primarily by the medical sector.
Alessio, what about food and other supplies like that? Is there ready supplies of fresh food?
Well, the stores most of the stores remain closed, although there are some general stores that are still open. I was talking to one of the persons who was just outside a few moments ago, and he told me that there is no shortage of any kind of supplies here at this point. The television station just ran a report that, quote, life returned to normal today, showing buses running in the streets and people buying some supplies. So at least from what we can say, there is no short of any kind of supplies at this time, Michael.
Alessio Vinci in Belgrade, thanks for that. Well, there are growing calls among some Balkan nations for international aid to help deal with the rush of refugees from Kosovo province. CNN's Tim Lister has that.
Terrified and exhausted, but ultimately thankful to be alive. Tens of thousands of Kosovo refugees are claiming sanctuary across Serbia's borders. Hundreds are heading south to Macedonia through the border village of Blace, bringing with them tales of horror and accusing the Serbs of systematic brutality. There's no way of verifying their accounts. International monitors left Kosovo before the bombing. Few, if any, overseas journalists remain in the province. At least 1,000 Kosovo Albanians crossed at Blace on Sunday. Most of the exodus were women, old men and children. They said Serb forces had separated them from men under the age of 60 who were forced to stay behind.
All these people have come from Kosovo, Pristina. They have seen hell and have nowhere to go.
Most of the displaced trudged across the border with whatever they could carry. Some managed to pile a few belongings onto tractors. The border between Kosovo and Albania has seen a far greater number of refugees. The story they told was the same. They simply wanted to survive. But for many, the journey had been treacherous.
Around 10:30, we were feeding the children, and at that moment an artillery shell came and exploded in the yard, and in 1 second killed 7 of them. The mother, grandmother, 4 kids, and my sister-in-law were without heads when I saw them the next second.
According to refugee agencies, some 30,000 people have reached Kosovo's border with Albania so far. Many said they'd been forced from their homes at gunpoint by Serbian paramilitary forces.
For instance, there is 100 houses. If there was only one house of Serbian, they didn't grenade it. They didn't grenade it.
United Nations workers in the area expect tens of thousands more ethnic Albanians to take this road over the next few days. And in doing so, they will put immense strain on Albania, the poorest country in Europe. Another point of exit, Montenegro, part of Yugoslavia, but at odds with its federal partner, Serbia. Just inside Montenegro, at Rosé, rows of drivers wait in hope that they will be admitted. Local authorities say several thousand refugees have arrived at this normally quiet crossing in the past 2 days. They've come from southwest Kosovo. Again, this tide of the displaced comprised mainly women and children.
They took all the men. They were taking them 2 by 2, and they killed them. There were women and children. Children were crying. They were putting pistols under people's throats. And they said, "We will not allow any of your children to see Kosovo. We will kill you all." They killed all the men. My only son and husband were taken away. And I think they killed them.
The Serbian government says ethnic Albanians are leaving Kosovo because of the NATO attacks and rejects claims that a humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding in the province. Whatever has driven these people from their towns, there's no disguising the anguish on their faces. Tim Lister, CNN.
A NATO spokesman says more than a quarter of the population in Kosovo has been displaced, and he warns of a grave crisis.
Whether we like it or not, we have to recognize that we are on the brink of a major humanitarian disaster in Kosovo, the likes of which have not been seen in Europe since the closing stages of World War II. We now estimate that the number of people displaced from their homes in Kosovo has gone over the 500,000 mark.
British Defence Secretary George Robertson has characterised Yugoslav troops in Kosovo as thugs. causing, quote, misery and suffering, unquote, under orders from President Milosevic in Belgrade. Secretary Robertson spoke to CNN earlier about alleged Serbian atrocities.
There is huge ethnic cleansing going on. Whole villages are being emptied, bombarded. Some of them no longer exist. You know, that is the chilling description I got from some of our people. Villages no longer exist. People are being driven out, families are being separated, and the men are being killed. There are atrocities being reported now on a day and daily basis from the most authoritative of sources. So what we predicted was going to happen is now happening.
Robertson again denied that the airstrikes have worsened the violence reported in Kosovo. Well, when we come back on World News, we'll continue our special coverage of the crisis in Kosovo. We'll also have other news. Please stay with us.
Remember when your imagination traveled without limits? Now Sabina flies you to over 100 business destinations, straight from the heart of Europe.
Nigeria, an emerging market with key opportunities in agriculture, mining, petroleum, and construction. With a population of over 100 million people, Nigeria is the largest single market in Africa. Nigerian Intercontinental Merchant Bank, one of the leading merchant banks in Nigeria, has professional expertise to help you understand Nigeria and the opportunities it offers. With our branch network in the nation's commercial hubs and correspondent banks in major financial centers of the world, you can depend on us for the right local and international support. As our numerous clients confirm, we know the terrain and we deliver. Nigerian Intercontinental Merchant Bank Limited. We make the difference.
Satellites in precise orbit. Aircraft systems designed for safety and reliability. Control technologies that improve people's lives. Throughout the world, throughout your life, we are Honeywell.
Due to regional time changes, most CNN programming will be seen 1 hour later. CNN will return to its regular schedule.
The Mess. Your questions and comments by phone, fax, or email. Only on CNN.
This is CNN.
Forced out by Serbian military forces, tens of thousands of refugees flee across Kosovo's borders.
NATO bombing raids rain devastation on military targets in Pristina.
And top Russian officials are poised to visit Belgrade in an effort to broker an end to the crisis. Hello and welcome to our viewers around the world. I'm Michael Holmes.
And I'm Mei Lee in Hong Kong. Russia is beginning a new diplomatic initiative in an effort to end the violence in Yugoslavia. Russian Prime Minister Yevgeny Primakov says he will travel to Yugoslavia Tuesday. Few details of that trip had been made public. Word of the mission comes as NATO intensifies its airstrikes on Yugoslav military targets in Kosovo. Serbian television broadcast pictures of fires and damaged buildings in the provincial capital, Pristina. NATO says it is attacking more of the Yugoslav army's tanks, artillery, and command centers in the province. The alliance accuses Serbian forces of human rights abuses against Kosovo's ethnic Albanian population. Serbian officials deny that. Some Balkan nations neighboring Yugoslavia are warning of a refugee crisis. They want international aid to deal with the influx of thousands of people from Kosovo. A group of Russian politicians is already in Belgrade. They say they are trying to end NATO's air offensive and the violence on the ground in Kosovo.
NATO officials say the exodus of ethnic Albanians from Kosovo is becoming Europe's greatest humanitarian crisis since the Second World War. It is now estimated that 500,000 people have left their homes in Kosovo. Thousands have gone south to Macedonia, crossing at the village of Blace. 60,000 Kosovars have reached Albania, most of them through a small border crossing at Morinai. But within the past hour, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe reported Yugoslavia has closed 3 border crossings into Albania. Nearly 10,000 have crossed into Montenegro, which is part of Yugoslavia but neutral in the conflict between NATO and Serbia. And for more on the refugee situation in Montenegro, we go now to CNN's Mike Hanna, who is standing by in the Republic's capital, Podgorica. Mike.
Well, Michael, if reports are true about the border crossing between Kosovo and Albania being shut down, that's very serious indeed for the country of the Republic of Montenegro. Some 10,000 refugees have crossed in the last 24 hours alone, that's according to officials. But this figure is that recorded at the town of Rojahe in eastern Montenegro. Many more are believed to have crossed at other points along the mountainous border. So the fear here is that this is just the thin edge of the wedge. The vanguard of the refugees appearing wraith-like through the mist. Having crossed the border, a crippling climb to the top of the mountain. A fleet of small vehicles moves up and down the road, ferrying those too young, too old, or too frail to walk. At the relative safety of the peak on Montenegrin soil, buses arrive to carry the refugees down the other side to the town of Rojahe. There, an opportunity to recount the horror of recent days, to tell of summary executions, of mass evictions, of Serb soldiers moving from their barracks into the now empty houses, and of thousands of people being taken away in covered trucks to an unknown destination.
The situation is very, very awful over there. Thousands of people were taken, we don't know where, last night.
Our house is burning up, our shops, everything. If you don't have money over here, he kill. If you have money here, he kill again.
In one of the cars fleeing Kosovo, the region's Serbian Archbishop, and from his staff, accounts of horrific atrocities taking place. The evidence is mounting. At the foot of these mountains, a massive forced removal is underway. It is brutal, but by all accounts, also systematic, coldly clinical. It appears this is not only angry Serb retaliation to the NATO attacks, rather a considered program of ethnic cleansing. The vast majority of the refugees we spoke to were from the city of Peć, which is the second largest in Kosovo. And this is deeply significant. Peć has a population of some 90,000. In the past, when these type of removals took place, it was from the smaller villages scattered throughout Kosovo. The fact that a large city like this is now being targeted is indicative of the extent of the problem there, and also of the extent of the problem that is going to spill over into republics like Montenegro or countries like Albania. Michael.
Mike, the British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook was talking about how the NATO nations are now trying to gather their resources together. What is needed there? What is the priority?
Well, the priority here is to ensure the safe passage of large numbers of refugees into this country. At present, with the numbers that are coming through, the situation is under control. In that eastern Montenegrin town of Rojahe, there is a degree of organization there. Certainly the Montenegrin police are playing a very important role in directing traffic, for example. The roads in the very mountainous region where yesterday it was snowing heavily have been recently graded. All those things are being done by the Montenegrins. But the people themselves are doing a lot. Refugees who have already come across the border are securing cars, are securing buses to ferry the refugees further down from the mountaintop. But there is a limit to which individuals and indeed the Montenegrin government can achieve with this crisis. If the crisis does intensify, which all accounts it looks as though it's going to, then outside assistance will be needed. Outside assistance on a grand scale. You are looking, as I said, up in the mountains about very difficult conditions. You will be needing food, you will be needing transport, you will be needing medical care, all the type of things that to deal with people who've been traumatized severely in recent days, many of whom would not have had food, many of whom would not have had water. So the situation is that the areas like Montenegro will need assistance. They will need some kind of outside help to come in here. And of course, the irony is that Montenegro has become under NATO attack. It is part of the Yugoslav Federation. There are Yugoslav military bases here that have been bombed in recent days. So Montenegro is dealing with a refugee problem. It is attempting to help the refugees. It is pro-West, but at the same time, it's a NATO target. It's very confusing for the people here, Michael.
Indeed. Mike Hanna in Podgorica, thank you very much for that update. Let's go now to CNN's Matthew Chance. He's watching the situation on the border between Macedonia and Yugoslavia. Matthew, bring us up to date, if you will.
Well, hello, Michael. I can tell you I'm standing now on the Macedonian border with Yugoslavia. I can see the hills of Kosovo in front of me, and the Kosovo town of Čystek, which has been well, basically emptied of its population for the past couple of weeks now. The important point about this town is it's the main road here from Pristina, the Kosovo capital, into Macedonia. It's been very quiet today along the actual road. We're seeing occasional cars come down. They're being let through. But what's been very interesting this morning is that as we were turning around and heading back to Skopje, the Macedonian capital, we spotted a huge swathe of refugees coming across through the back roads on tractors over the hills from Kosovo. They'd obviously crossed illegally. There's a lot of press and other aid workers here now to meet them. There is about 1,100 of them that have come across apparently last night, some of them walking 30 kilometers from towns within Kosovo to get into Macedonia. The Macedonian armed forces are there with them now. They're being escorted into Skopje so they can be registered. There are no camps as yet in Macedonia, even though there have been about 20,000 refugees come here over the last couple of weeks. They're being housed very much within the local ethnic Albanian community here in Macedonia. It's just as with so many coming across now, there are big concerns about whether that ethnic Albanian community, which is in itself an impoverished community, whether it can handle this big inflow of refugees. Michael?
And have you heard or seen any signs of military activity in the area, Matthew?
Well, as a matter of fact, earlier this morning, it's very quiet over in Kosovo right now. We have heard isolated detonations of some kind. We've heard sporadic gunfire. Now, we don't know what that's all about. We've also heard some jets fly overhead. We don't know, obviously, who those jets belong to. Some of the refugees I've spoken to this morning who've come across overnight said that the Serbs had been, the Yugoslav armed forces and Serb paramilitary gangs had been surrounding their villages, telling them to leave or they'd shoot them. Others had said that the Serb armed forces actually shot at them as they were trying to get away. So there is some military activity going on over there. There is still a considerable amount of violence. Michael?
Indeed, Matthew, and as Robin Cook, the British Foreign Secretary, said a short while ago, 150,000 estimated refugees en route now to Albania. May.
Moscow is sending a top official on an urgent peace mission to Belgrade. CNN's Steve Harrigan joins us now live from Moscow with more. Steve.
Well, we've just had news confirmation from the Russian State Press Service that the Russian Prime Minister Yevgeny Primakov plans to take a trip to Belgrade. He plans to leave Moscow at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. Now, this mission has caught many people by surprise. The plans of the trip are still really in development. But what we do know, what we do hear from the Russians so far, are that Mr. Primakov's goals are twofold. First, he intends to try to halt the bombing, and second, to regulate the conflict. Now, what has not been said yet, and what most people are wondering about, is whether Mr. Primakov has any assurances from Yugoslav leader Slobodan Milosevic about whether or not Mr. Milosevic is willing to return to the bargaining table. So far, we're just hearing that Mr. Primakov's goal is to halt the bombing and to regulate the conflict. But it is a very high-level mission. The head of the Russian government plans to go tomorrow. Still, who is with him in the entourage remains to be seen. There have been reports that he may be accompanied by Russia's defense minister, Igor Sergeyev. But Mr. Primakov, once again, in a dramatic surprise announcement, intends to go to Belgrade to try to break this logjam. He leaves tomorrow morning.
Steve, we know that a Russian delegation is already in Belgrade trying to negotiate some sort of deal. Any idea what initiated Primakov's visit to Belgrade tomorrow?
Well, some sources are saying that Mr. Primakov has been spurred on by the French, who have repeatedly said that Russia really holds the key to breaking this logjam. You know, Russia and the Serbs in Yugoslavia have been close allies for a long time. There are cultural ties, linguistic ties, historical ties, and really it's been the hope of diplomats on both sides, in the West and in Russia, that this crisis could prove to be an opportunity for Russia, an opportunity to assert itself on the world stage, and an opportunity to mediate between the two sides to try to bring peace. So it looks like Mr. Primakov is ready to seize the initiative and take the chance on a peace initiative and leave tomorrow morning.
All right, Steve Harrigan, live from Moscow. Thank you very much. Well, Yugoslavia's deputy ambassador to Britain says his nation is willing to talk with the Russian delegation. For more on Belgrade's reaction to Moscow's plans, CNN's Alessio Vinci joins us now from the Yugoslav capital. Alessio, what can you tell us?
May, Serb television just reported that the Russian Prime Minister Primakov will be coming to Belgrade on Tuesday morning. Then the Serb television reported that he will be traveling to New York, to the United Nations. However, in the meantime, a delegation of 3 prominent liberal politicians, among them a former prime minister, is also here in Belgrade. They are seen here, however, as being too pro-West and too close to the views of the United States. Serb television's just run a short report showing their pictures next to the one of U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. The TV report called the Russian delegations, quote, criminals who sold half of Russia to the West. So at least judging from the report, on state-controlled televisions, they appear to be not really welcomed here. However, they met earlier today here in Belgrade with the Deputy Prime Minister Vuk Draskovic, also considered, at least here in Belgrade, more Western-oriented than other prominent politicians here in Yugoslavia. I spoke to the former Prime Minister Jego Gajda earlier, who told me their mission here is trying to get the Yugoslavs back to the negotiating table, something that appears at this point highly unlikely given the cold reception they received here. Meanwhile, Serb television showed pictures of several buildings on fire in Pristina, reporting that Sunday night and early Monday morning, the provincial capital was hit several times by NATO bombs and missiles. The heaviest bombardment, it reported, on Pristina so far since the beginning of the air raids last week. We have also footage of the extensive damage after last night's raids. Serb television reports that a dental clinic was hit, as well as the building of the central police station in Pristina, where 3 policemen were also wounded. Serb TV also reported that some civilian buildings and a Catholic church have been hit. Meanwhile, here in Belgrade, it is a quiet Monday morning, a big contrast to the heavy shelling south of here in the provincial capital. For the first time since the beginning of the air raids last week, the lights in the city remained all night on. About 3 hours ago, sirens wailed once more, a warning to the population that the city remains under the threat of air raids. Public transportation runs at a reduced pace, and people find it harder and harder to move around. There is virtually no gas available for private use, as what's available is being used primarily by the medical sector. May.
All right, Alessio Vinci, thank you very much for that report. Michael, back to you.
Okay, joining us now is Andre Angeli. He's with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. He is in Tirana, the Albanian capital. Mr. Angeli, thanks for being with us. I'm wondering if you can give us some information on these reported border closings.
Yeah, good morning from Albania. Yes, this information is correct. The border crossing...
To bring you Business Unusual, the weekly program that explores the creative leadership that is changing how business is done. Want to succeed in business? Drop in on Business Unusual in association with Arthur Anderson, Sundays on CNN.
A new diplomatic effort to solve the Kosovo crisis. Russia's prime minister could travel to Belgrade as a mediator.
Meanwhile, NATO steps up its campaign of airstrikes against Yugoslavia.
And ethnic Albanians flood out of Kosovo. The situation may become Europe's